This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. In this episode of The Biggest Table, I welcome Neeta Mittal, co-founder of LXV Wine, to discuss her unique journey from growing up in India to establishing a prestigious winery in Paso Robles, California. Neeta shares insights about her upbringing, surrounded by diverse culinary traditions, and the influence of her meticulous mother. She recounts her educational path at UC Berkeley, the serendipitous discovery of Paso Robles, and her deep passion for wine culture, inspired by European traditions. Neeta explains LXV Wine's focus on creating textured, age-worthy wines with a blend of global spices aimed at fostering a shared immersive experience. The conversation delves into her advocacy for innovation, community involvement, and the meaningful connections formed through wine. Additionally, Neeta reflects on her role in a predominantly white male industry, embracing her distinctive background as an advantage. She concludes by highlighting the significance of wine as a rich, sensory-driven journey intertwined with history, culture, and personal experiences. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Neeta Mittal. Born in India, Neeta grew up immersed in tradition, creativity, and a drive for excellence. After graduating from UC Berkeley and honing her storytelling craft in Hollywood, Neeta channeled her passion for wine into founding LXV Wine with her husband, Kunal. LXV pairs premium wines with globally inspired spices, creating immersive experiences that celebrate flavor and terroir. Named one of USA Today's top 10 wine tasting experiences in America, LXV reflects Neeta's philosophy, double down on who you are. As a leader in Paso Robles, she champions innovation, community, and a legacy of connection through wine and storytelling. So thanks for joining me today, Neeta. It's a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, and as just sort of, being forthright, you and I met because I work for Tapa, and Tapa now sells, your wines are part of our portfolio, which I'm excited about, but, just also want to let my audience know that there is that connection, but also I'm really excited about your story, as an Indian woman. There aren't many of you in the wine world, and so I'm really curious about your story. But also you're producing this great immersive experience, and just want to understand, this cultural and wine amalgamation you're doing in Paso. So thanks for being part of this conversation today.
No, thank you. In fact, when we started talking earlier, and I wanted to understand your audience and who we are speaking with, and there is so much about being connected to Tapa that is sort of serendipitous, being connected to Arizona, Sedona, especially. It's I'm very happy and glad that our wholesale or to the market strategy has started with Tapa. I'm very excited about that.
Very cool. Yeah. And so just to begin, you grew up in India, and so what was your childhood like, and what role did food and hospitality play in your upbringing?
It's interesting. I just got back from India, and it's one of the things I tell anybody who goes to India, wants to go to India, is it's very craggy on the eyes. It's not like Tuscany. It's not like Bordeaux, which are two wine regions very close to my heart. But there's something about the people in India. They move you, they shift you, they change you. And I think growing up in India, I grew up in a very small town in India. And it was interesting, like this time, my mom, she's 80 now, and she's in the car. And in India, you have chauffeurs who drive you. And so she has her chauffeur who's driving her. We are in the back seat, and she cannot get out of the car because she's 80 and she's a little bit not very nimble, if I may. And she drives to the market because she shops for her vegetables and her fruits every single day.
Wow.
And so she walks, and she's been doing this for the last 50 years, 60 years. And so people know her in the market. She's also a biotechnologist. So um, she cannot take that element out of her of how precise everything needs to be. And so literally there are vendors who look at her and say, nah, not today. It's not going to be good enough for you. And then there are other vendors who come up to her, and they have things in like these wooden baskets, and they show it to her, and mom like accepts it or not. So this is something that I love doing, going to the markets with her. And the reason I talk about it is there's so much now in retrospect. I realize that there's so much in that tradition of going to the markets with her. At once upon a time, I could, when she could walk, and we walked from vendor to vendor, going just like our farmers markets in the US, right?
Yes.
The farmers are there. In India, the farmers market is every single day, all day. And so going from vendor to vendor and understanding and smelling and touching, and her analysis of what's good and what's not. So we grew up with that. Both my sister and I, we grew up with that. And I think more than the flavors, my mom is from the west, my dad is from the south of India. And in India, every 50 miles, the cuisine shifts, the
Okay.
language shifts, people's attitude shifts. So the west and the south are very, very different. And I'm married to Kunal from the north, so it's a very interesting amalgamation. But mom and dad both had very different sensibilities of food,
Hmm.
and mom always tried to incorporate that. So the whole idea of quote unquote global spices and global flavors was a part of our kitchen every day, because it was so diverse, their taste, both of their tastes. And so we've grown up with that array and that sort of confluence of flavors. But I think also learned from mom a lot about the depth of everything. Like not
Hmm.
take anything for granted. Yes, it's just a vegetable, but she used to be so specific, and she still is very specific on. When she picks up the fish, she actually looks at the gills of the fish
Okay.
to know if they are fresh or not. Or when she picks up the meat, she has a very specific way with the way she looks at the meat. And so there was a certain intent, I guess, that got inculcated
Hmm.
in my personality. So everything that I do, I feel like that I always question: is there an intent behind it? So I growing up in a small town in India was very vibrant, very colorful, especially in my household where mom and dad are from two very different parts of India. A huge learning. It was all about academics,
Hmm.
but food was very, very important. Now, we did not grow up with wine in India. Wine
Okay.
was never a part of our repertoire. Wine came to India much, much later. Um, However, the Portuguese came to India in, I'm going to botch my history here, somewhere in the 1700s, 1800s. And they, of course, bought along with them port wine. And so, believe it or not, port wine was very well known in India with us growing up. And we had many Christian friends. And India is a beautiful secular country. I
Right.
went to Catholic school myself.
Okay.
And one of our uncles, we always call them uncles and aunts. And so one of my uncles was Christian, and we went there for Christmas to their home. And they would cook gorgeous cakes, bake beautiful cakes, and then give us tiny little sips of port. And so
Hmm.
that was my first experience of wine, if you will, which was
Right.
very endearing. Yeah.
Interesting. So you grew up, pushed with academic rigor, but creativity, but also this intense focus. I love how you described your mom's just attention to detail in the market, and the intent in which she shopped for vegetables, and just the beauty of that, and India is known for these beautiful spices and these, fragrant aromas of curries and all sorts of different um, food that, many of us love, but it's also, like you said, it's very different. It's like saying that, Chinese food is all the same, or, American food is all the same, but, the specificity of the region in which you grew up in, like what characterized that sort of food for you growing up?
Say that one more time, Andrew.
So,
What was
yeah, no, like what, you mentioned that food is very different in India based on region. And so what typified
oh,
your culinary, upbringing?
so the south of India, where my father is from, it's very tropical.
Mhm.
It's a very hot country. If you've heard of this memoir that was just written, it's a beautiful book. And I want to talk about the book, and I'm forgetting the name of the book. It'll come to me at some point. It's a book in Oprah's club, and it's from that region of Kerala, which is
Mm,
called God's own country. And very tropical, a lot of fish, a lot of heat, because it's hot, you needed people to sweat to cool them down. So it's
right.
very interesting. A lot of spices, a lot of coconut. So
Mm,
think about Thai food with a lot of spice to it.
okay.
And the only difference is in Thai food, the spice comes a lot from chilies,
Right.
and in southern Indian food, it comes a lot from brown spices along
Okay.
with chilies.
Yep.
So that's where my father's cuisine, so to speak, came from. Mom from the West, it's the heartlands of India. And so it was very much driven by grain and vegetable and
Mm,
a lot of minimalism. And so, because it's a very poor part of the country where my mom was born and raised. And so her cuisine, and that area's cuisine is very much, it's very flavorful, but very minimalistic. And then you go to the north where my husband is from, although I met him much later in life, but North Indian cuisine has a huge impact all over our country, because that's truly really the Persian cuisine, the one that came from the Arabs in the north,
okay.
and the whole Silk Road,
Mm,
and that is very rich. It's if you think about that, the culture of the Arabs and the Persians and the Turks, it was very rich, very a lot of cream, a lot of nuts, and so we were exposed to such diverse food cultures growing up. And at some point in my mom's kitchen, they amalgamated in
okay.
every dish.
Right.
It used to be a joy. So, dad's tropical dish would get mom's, a hint of curry leaves, or a little bit of cream added to a vegetable, or the biryani, which is the famous Indian paella,
Right.
always had amalgamation of all three regions, which is why my mom's, I call her Ai in my language. My mom is called Ai, and my
Mm,
Ai's biryani till date remains my comfort food.
that sounds
Yeah,
delightful. Yes. Awesome. And so you moved to America. You went to UC Berkeley. What did you study at UC Berkeley?
I'm an Indian, so what do you expect? Engineering or medicine?
Okay.
Um, my dad's a foundryman, and so it was expected of me to take over his foundries. My sister's a doctor, so she did the medicine path, and I did the engineering path. So I did material science and engineering. So I had my master's from Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But your life hasn't worked out that way, and so how did your parents then react? Because there is a lot of familial pressure, I'm assuming, in India to so how did your parents react as you took a different
Yeah.
journey?
Um, they're still reacting. For them, it's one of those things where it's a matter of context, right?
Mhm.
And for them, being an engineer, taking over my dad's business, that would have been the prodigal daughter path. Um, so my sister, she's done everything and much more. She's a very successful doctor, and somehow I was always the rebellious one, the creative one. Never wanted to walk the path that was already walked on. And mom and dad don't realize, especially my mom, that kind of that streak comes from both of them. They both come from very, very, very humble beginnings. My mother actually was the first educated person, not woman, but person of a village. And so although it was education, she did have that streak of doing something against the grain. So I always tell her, I said, you don't realize, but it's you and me. So I think for them, they grapple with it. They don't understand that wine is not alcohol. Wine is a culture.
Right.
And that's the difference. But they haven't lived here, so they haven't experienced it. But just a cute story. My mom, she's a teetotaler. She does not drink. But if she will have, and she's broken the rule maybe 2 or 3 times in her life, and every time it has been for LXV wine. If it's made by her daughter, it's okay.
Yeah.
And so she will break a rule. So that tells me more than reading into anything else. I'm like, okay, I'm going to read into that and believe that they're blessing it in one way or the other.
No, for sure. That's beautiful. I love that story of your mom breaking her teetotaling ways to sip your wine. And so what led to your passion then in wine? Like how did you begin to eat, breathe, and drink this culture of wine?
Yeah. It's interesting you say culture, because honestly, it was the culture. Kunal and I, we met in the Bay Area in Berkeley, and Napa became a thing to do. Wine became a thing to do, but more so, the culture of wine was very intimate, so very familiar to us, because that's the fabric of the Indian culture, where everything is, about intimacy between the earth, between the people. There is a kind of an ecosystem that exists, which is very familiar. And I think that is what happened first, was the wine culture. We really loved how much more there is around a bottle of wine. It's just not the content, it's the context. Who you're sharing it with, why did somebody make that bottle of wine? And then you go really deep down into the vineyard and the terroir and the intent, and then coming back here, who you're sharing with and what's on the dining table, what are the conversations. So it's just amazing that bottle of wine has a history and a future and a present, which is beautiful, and the memories that come out of it. So that's really what we got attracted to begin with. And we started traveling quite a bit, my husband and I, and somehow we were gravitating a lot towards wine cultures, and found Paso Robles very serendipitously. Kunal is a pilot by hobby, and we actually accidentally landed, which is not a good thing for a pilot to say, but it's a story of the day. And so really found Paso that way, and fell in love with it. And I think so. Wine culture happened first, Paso happened second, wine happened after all of that.
As you were exploring wine, was there a moment, like a bottle, a wine varietal, a moment where you and your husband were like, hey, this is something I want to devote myself to? Was there a moment, like, and maybe there's not, but I'm just curious, like.
Very, very clear, very clear. 2 things have happened, because, I was said to be an engineer, and then we moved to LA. Kunal is a tech person, so
Okay.
He's always been in tech. I've always done marketing and branding. That's been like my passion, was marketing and branding. And so I was working in entertainment and Hollywood, traveling to India because I launched a Hollywood casting company in India. So very much, and then wine was just a part of like our repertoire to socialize, to romanticize, but never really like never thought of it as our vocation, so to speak. And what was I completely lost track of the question.
No, yeah. Was there a moment of a wine?
The wine, yes. 2 things have defined my journey. In LA, there's a restaurant called Giorgio Baldi, a very old establishment, and there was a Brunello de Montalcino, and it was by Biondi Santi, and the psalm there was so amazing. We were new to the world of wine. I mean, we had traveled to Tuscany, knew a little bit about Brunello, but we traveled when we were in our romance phase. Hopefully, we still are. But it was more about us than the wine. And then I had a Biondi Santi for the first time, and something shifted. something shifted that dinner, where I thought, this is something that I want to be a part of.
Hmm.
This is beyond just what's in that bottle. And then, of course, I found out about Bianchi Santi and his legacy in creating Brunello's and his family's legacy. So that was definitely a pivotal point. Well, did I say that I'm going to just abandon what I was doing and do wine? No, but something shifted.
Hmm.
And the second experience for me was a dinner at Jose Andres bazaar at the
Okay.
SLS in LA. And I, to date, and we're talking about 18 years ago, to date, I remember every single course.
Wow.
That was so monumental. The molecular gastronomy was just a thing that was happening at that time. And to have that sort of detail and beauty in something that is so little and specific, and then there is drama around everything else.
Right.
It just somehow the hospitality part, I guess, and the food and the wine solidified with that dinner.
Hmm. So you have
Yeah,
this
so that
beautiful,
was like very clearly two
yeah.
experiences in my life. Yeah.
No, and I can understand, based a little of what I know, like, this Brunello, this beautiful wine paired, and then later on Jose Andres and this, I don't want to say theatrical, but almost this theatrical hospitality, this experience where
Yes.
dining becomes immersive. I can see how those two mingle together to create LXV wines. But before we get to that, I do want to know, you say you accidentally landed and stumbled upon Paso Robles, which, like you said, that's not a good thing to say as a pilot, but like, so what then, you land in Paso, what drew you to Paso?
Um, our story is a story of serendipity, just meeting serendipitous people, or rather meeting people serendipitously.
Yeah.
We when we landed in Paso, conveniently enough, our friend who knew someone in Paso picked us up, and that person was a realtor.
Hmm.
Now, once you are in a realtor's hands, they know exactly what route to take you on. So we drove by Vineyard Drive, and that was just beautiful. Vineyard Drive, it's like a slice of Tuscany here. That's where we live, is along that route. So that was strike one. And then we met this gentleman. If you've heard of Denner Winery in Paso Robles, Ron Denner, the proprietor, he's no longer the proprietor. He sold his business. And I just met him outside. There was like this hearth. He was smoking a cigar, and we were supposed to drive back. And this is on a second visit,
Right.
or third visit to Paso. And we were supposed to drive back. So I told Kunal, you do the tasting, and I'll just hang out. So started talking to him, and just got very pally. We had like a banter. And when we wanted to buy a property in Paso, I called him thinking he'll say yay or nay. And he spent 45 minutes explaining the appellations, because at that time, the appellations were not public knowledge.
Right.
And he made me, this gentleman who I've met for only once before, um, smoking a cigar, he made me drop the offer that we had made on a property in a different AVA, because he wanted me to buy something in Willow Creek, which is
Right.
the AVA of notoriety in Paso. And I don't know, it's just all these people. And then ever since, he's stayed a mentor. Every time we have a major decision, I've always run it by him, and always for the better. And there are all these people who have shaped our journey. And I think I wish I could take credit for saying that, oh, we came up with this brilliant business idea, or we had this conviction that we're going to. It was really these people who guided us and believed in us. And it could be a small decision like what cork to use, to a larger decision of buying this property and everything in between. And we've really leaned on our mentors, and they have really been phenomenal.
I love that about recognizing the people that have guided this journey, because I think for all of us, if we take time, we would see those people show up in our lives, those people, we might say, random encounters, depending, but like those people that have shaped and become mentors for us. So I know I love that aspect. And so what about the AVA of Paso, or the climate of Paso that, you wanted to produce these wines? What is it about the weather, the climate, the soils of Paso for our listeners who may not be familiar
Sure.
with where Paso is? And
So geographically, Paso is between San Francisco and LA on
Mhm.
on the central coast, about 20 miles inland. That's the beginning of the AVA, and then it stretches eastward. The beauty of Paso is, especially on the west side, that's where we gravitated towards, is you are blessed by the ocean, and
Mm.
so it cools us down, allows for a longer hang time, allows for the vines to cool in the evening. Very important to have that bracing acidity in the wine. So a lot of wine that, if you want to make wine that's driven by structure, the west side of Paso really serves beautifully.
Mm.
So I think that was very, very important to us, because we are driven by European wines. One of the things with LXV, and you've tasted our wines, we go a little bit against the grain of Paso wines because our inspiration is Europe.
Okay.
Not that one is better than the other, definitely. Ours is a lot about elegance, restraint, and balance, because our inspiration is Margaux and Saint-Emilion. Like,
Mm.
those two are big, big wine regions for us that influence us, so much so that we actually make wine in Bordeaux, in Saint-Emilion. So I think that, along with the spirit, this, camaraderie, this idea that you could have a wine brand introduced by two Indians who are engineers, but are very passionate about wine, but really know nothing else about it, don't have a big, it's not a tax write-off for them. Kunal and I, we started LXV with $10,000.
Oh.
And I always bring that up when I talk, not because of that amount. It's not the 10,000 that's important, but the idea that if you love something and you're passionate about something and you grow it slowly and steadily, and along the way you learn the craft and you hone your passion and you are ready to pivot, because that's also very important. When we came to Paso, it was all about Rhones.
Mhm.
Everybody only did Rhone wines. And we are influenced by Bordeaux. So, of course, our first vintage was Rhone wines, and then we stopped. And we said, no, this is not our passion. Our passion is Bordeaux. And so we really dove deep into what are the vineyards that can do good Bordeaux's. And of course, you have very iconic cabs that come out of Paso. And so we really were able to pivot and be nimble. And that's Paso.
Mm.
That's the idea of Paso. Paso is, they like to say Paso is for the maverick, but I would take it further and I would say Paso is for that indulgent passion
Mm.
um, that could go against the grain in so many ways. But if you stick to your guns, you really could be a very serious contender in the winemaking game.
No, and there are some great wines coming out of Paso now that are highly regarded, and
Yes.
um, very different structures, and um, and so as you compare, so if people are familiar with like a Napa cab, which is what California is most known for, like how would your Cabernet and Bordeaux varietals differ from, say, Napa, or what would be, your defining characteristics of the wine?
Texture, big on texture, backed by freshness.
Hmm.
I think that's the best way I could describe LXV wine. Texture is at the heart of everything that we do. And it's an obsession I have with texture. Even our tasting room, the tables, the walls, everything has texture. And the reason for that, the reason to bring in texture into everything is um, it's a way to communicate the depth of everything that goes behind the scenes, happens behind the scenes. For me, texture is important to show that there are 1,000 decisions, maybe more, that have led to this moment of someone tasting the wine or being in the tasting room.
Right.
Because texture has that, it's tactile, you can feel it, you can be objective or subjective about it. So texture, and then we in wines, it translates very, very seriously. So what I mean by that is where the fruit comes from, where the grapes come from is extremely important. The terroir, the soil, the climate. We seek some of the best vineyards on the Central Coast. Biennacido, one of the most decorated vineyards, we source from there. G2, which is pretty much every 100-point wine out of Paso comes out of 3 vineyards, and G2 is one of them.
Wow.
So that then translated into also how we do viticulture. So we're very specific on being in control of the viticulture, even if we don't own that vineyard. And that's been a very important thing for us. And the way we've gotten it there is by cultivating this relationship of trust. We are very, very, very particular of paying on time for that reason. Of course, we want to be good customers, but at the same time, we also want to be in the grower's conscience when they think about a producer. Because if we want to ask the grower to do something specific for our acreage or our lot, we have now cultivated that very serious relationship with them.
Right.
So that's very important. So, the canopy management, the watering schedules, how much fruit, if we need to do any green drop. We only do acreage contracts. We don't do tonnage contracts. All that leads to that trust and relationship with the grower. And that translates, of course, into then what ends up in the cellar. And then the cellar practices, the élevage or the barrel program. We work with some of the most amazing cooperages in the world, have very good relationships with them. One of them, shout out to Baron, Lionel at Baron, and his office is on the same grounds as Chateau Canon in Saint-Emilion. So that's very interesting for us, and to work with people who also make barrels for Cheval Blanc, or we use Darnajou barrels, who's the cooperage for Petrus, and so it's taken time. It did not come right away. We had to prove ourselves. And now 12 years later, it's great to have all these relationships. And so everything that we do, everything that we decide, everything that we choose, the idea is, are we drawing more texture into the wine? And as I said, it has to be backed by freshness, because ageability is very important. We make wines for ageability. We make wines for cellaring. We make very, very serious wines. My one of my biggest inspirations is Dominus, and Tawny or Togny in Napa Valley. These 2 wines are like hallmarks of ageable wines, and I aspire to be that.
Right.
It's way, way, way long way to go.
Yeah.
To be anywhere close to them. But that's how I would describe our wines. Are it is an experience from the beginning to the end. It's a tactile experience. It's a hedonistic experience in that sense. But always wine that's fresh, will not be dull on the palate, will not weigh you down. Also, because food is very important to us, and our conversation has always been, and so it's very important for the wine to have that freshness.
For sure.
To dance with food, and all that leads to cellaring and ageability of the wine.
As you were talking about just the attention to detail with which you've approached LXV Wines, I couldn't help but think of the story you were telling of your mom, and her at the market, and her attention to detail, and just how your mom is in you, and that beauty and that upbringing, what your mom has given you, and how she resides in you still. Like, I could see it, these parallel stories just commingling so beautifully.
Thank you. She, it is this cute little anecdote. There is, in the 10+2 grade in India, you get graded from 1 to how many ever students appear for the exam. And there were 45,000 students who appeared for the exam. And I stood 20th, which I thought was not bad. And I had a very disappointed mom who could not believe that 19 other students were better. And so that's the standard that I live up to, and I try to live up to every single day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you have this quote that double down on who you are. And so how, like, explain the quote for our listeners, how is this continuing to influence your wine, but also just who you are in the community and who you want to be?
At a recent, there's an event called SomCon in San Diego, and one of the audience members asked me this, what do you think about the imposter syndrome? Do you ever have that? And strangely, never had it. Don't even know much about it. Haven't even like looked into it. For me, my distinction, I've never noticed it. I've never paid attention to it. I've never used it. We've carved our own path based on our passion for Bordeaux, our love for the Paso community, and the incorporation of the spices was to develop a language. So for people who don't know about LXV, we pair our wines. Every wine is paired with flavors from all over the world. And the idea to do that, of course, we are comfortable with spices and flavors being from India. But the idea to do that was not so much about us, but about the person who walks through that door. We wanted to create a language that is comfortable for the person who's tasting our wines so that it becomes a dialogue. A lot of time wine tastings are a monologue.
Yeah.
We say this is our intent and why we are passionate about it, and this is how we started, and this is the terroir, and this is the wine, and this is the blend. And the person is taking in and trying their best, like they're soaking it in and appreciating everything you're doing. As soon as you put down those spices, it becomes this animated dialogue. And there's less needed to be said about the wine and much more understood. And that's what I love about a spice pairing. And then the person who's drinking the wine, now they're making this wine experience their own, because they talk about, this reminds me of, we have a wine that's paired with, a Syrah is paired with a Lapsang Souchong tea, which is a smoked tea from China. And, somebody will say, this reminds me of this camping thing that I went with my father. Or we do one called chai spice, which is our only Indian spice. We don't do Indian spices. But this chai spice we do with like a wine that's a left bank Bordeaux wine, inspired by the left bank. So very Margaux in style. And it's just a pillar of baking spices on the nose. And so the chai spice is very kind of sympathetic with that. And so I'll have somebody say, oh my God, this reminds me of my Nana's baking or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very animated dialogue that happens. So this whole journey has been about what are we passionate about and who we are, and not trying to be any different. So I'm not just saying about the fact that we're Indian, but the fact that we're passionate about Bordeaux, or the fact that we have a small tasting room in downtown Paso, which 12 years ago, people were like, no, don't do it. It's not going to work. If you're serious about wine tasting, you should be on the vineyard. We didn't have the resources to build a tasting room at the vineyard at that time. Now we just got a permit to build. So
congratulations.
In about 2 years, we'll have a tasting room. Thank you. With 2 years, we'll have a tasting room on the property. And so that question about the imposter syndrome, I told, and she's, and interesting is she was a celebrity chef. She's a celebrity chef who asked the question. But she's Latina. And I would have never expected a question like that from somebody who's that decorated and celebrated. Like, she's one master chef. She's brilliant at what she does. And, my thought was, there are others who'd rather have this advantage of having a distinction, having a way to be different. So, that's probably the whole idea of doubling down on who you are. And I was telling them, they can't even have the imposter syndrome, even if they wanted to. It's ours to own, and it's ours to flourish. So
Right.
um, they they can't have it even if they wanted. So it became like this mantra at some con, which was kind of, it was interesting. Yeah.
No, that's cool. And, just, yeah, just being confident in who you are and, your path in your journey. And how has that enabled you, because you mentioned, or you mentioned in one of your biographies that, you're in a white male dominated um,
Industry.
vocation,
Right.
industry. Yeah. And so how, being a minority, being a woman, being from India, nonetheless, like how has your confidence then inspired you to continue on with hurdles that you may have experienced?
It's a distinct advantage. It's a huge advantage because I don't get compared to anybody else.
Hmm.
I think a white male young man coming into the industry is going to get compared to so many others who've come before him. And is he as good as that person? Is he making wine like that? Is he talking like that? Is he social like that? Or is he a curmudgeon like that? It's so many standards, expectations. I am free.
Hmm.
Nobody expects anything from me. Nobody has, every time we've broken a barrier, we're like, oh, and
Right.
but to break the barrier, there has been no comparison. And
Hmm.
so it's actually come easy. I'll be very honest. It has
Wow.
come easy in that sense. Of course, we've worked very, very hard,
Yeah.
but not being compared. That's such a huge freedom, because you don't have to live up to anybody else's expectations. So I think that has helped a lot. Being a woman definitely brings in a certain ethic, ethos, pathos, um, a certain um, empathy
Hmm.
in a business, because at the end of the day, it's a business. There are
Right.
employees, there are P&Ls, there are contracts. And I think being a woman brings that empathy, brings
Hmm.
that softness, which I think it's beautiful because we come to wine for that, right? We
Right.
come to wine for lifting that moment. We
Hmm.
come to wine for creating a moment. And to be synergetic with that energy, I think it's beautiful. Being Indian, I think, brings a different flavor, no pun intended. I look at wine differently. I taste wine differently. What I haven't grown up eating blueberries,
Right.
or a lot of time comparisons are made. Oh, this is like God, what's that? Cornflakes. I'm forgetting. It's one of the cornflakes flavors, and many wines get compared to that. Or you can talk about bubble gum. Um, I come from a small town in India. We didn't have bubble gum for years. I
Right.
didn't have blueberries till I came to America.
Hmm.
And so, peaches, pears, none of these fruits we grew up eating. So my context of understanding wine is very different. And probably that's why I lean more towards texture as well, because
Hmm.
that's the language that I'm more comfortable with.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
But overall, it's been great. I think being an Indian woman has given an edge, has given the freedom to be who I want to be and how I want to express myself. And I think it's been a huge advantage.
hmm. That's cool. Like, and it's probably giving you the freedom to create these spice pairings because, like you said, the wine language of flavors is dominated by the West, and what the West, is used to. Whereas you bring this spice mixture from around the world, to help people um, taste wine in a different way, And I have a friend who's been on this podcast, Gisela Kreglinger. She's written on the spirituality of wine, but she talks about the priesthood of all drinkers, of wanting to help people have the confidence as they sip wine to not be so constrained by the experts, but to say like, hey, what am I experiencing? What's coming up for me? And sort of like what you were saying with the spice packets of it brings up a conversation. It starts a conversation instead of a monologue.
Yes, and it also becomes, to be honest, it becomes a journey for us too, because now we get to be a part of their story. Usually it's the other way around, right? It's our story and you get to participate a little bit in it.
Right.
Now we get to participate in your story. And so it broadens our journey as well. We were just doing the math the other day, just for fun. There are about 150,000 people who have done the wine and spice pairings over the last, and we are a very, very tiny tasting room, right? So to know that 150,000 people have experienced what we created, but to also look at it differently and say, there have been 150,000 stories that they have told us. And that has broadened the experience and made it so much richer for us. We've connected with people where I just got a message from somebody for Thanksgiving, and they just how beautiful the Thanksgiving was. And Thanksgiving is one of the best times because I get a lot of messages from club members saying, hey, we use your spices in this and this, and then there'll usually be a picture. In the picture, there'll be somebody in the family and so the story becomes so much richer for us. And that's been a beautiful part of this pairings, the story of the pairings.
Right. Because again, like you talked about, it's this culture that you're trying to create. And, the wine has a past. It has the present moment you're drinking and a future of how the wine's going to shape lives to come. And so I just see you creating this culture around LXV that, everyone is enriched and everyone is invited to participate and remember.
Yes. And that's the generosity of the land. And I always believe in that. If you look at our growers are the most humble people. Growing grapes is a very noble endeavor. So who are we as winemakers to take something that noble and add ego to it? No, it needs to stay noble. It needs to stay humble throughout its journey. And I think that is almost like a mandate I feel we have taken is respect, that worker from Mexico who works in, we just finished harvest, and to see them pick the grapes from 11 o'clock in the night to 4 in the morning, and then they have another shift in some other vineyard where they'll go and pick in the day. We only pick in the night, but some other vineyard that's back to back, and that's what that wine is about. And we don't lose sight of it.
I love that, the staying connected to the land and to the product.
And the humility of it all.
Yeah. How long has LXV been around? Like
2010 was our first vintage.
Okay. So as you reflect on sort of 14 vintages, like what's a lesson wine has taught you that you would love listeners to hear?
That's a very good question. I think we talk a lot about being connected, the energy field. We talk a lot about how, the butterfly effect, somebody does something, affects us. When you live this world of wine, it becomes more and more apparent every single day. This idea of being connected, this idea of being influenced by somebody else's actions, this idea that you can influence somebody else's life, this idea that energy is true, positivity is true, so is negativity. All these ideas become more and more apparent with every vintage, with every wine. And I think with that, your role in this dimension becomes stronger and at the same time becomes less significant. It's like a duality. I
Right.
think you realize you have a role to play, but at the same time, you realize that you're such a small part of this bigger cosmos and this whole ecosystem that you're not that significant either. And that duality becomes very true.
Mm.
So I think that's a lesson that I've learned is it just is.
Mm.
This world, the wine, the people, the connection, it just is. And you're here to nurture it and nourish it and be like a shepherd, and then that's it. There's
Mm.
nothing more or nothing less to that. Um, um, it's very humbling. It's a very, very humbling endeavor, making wine. And I think on the really, this is sort of like of the deep down, the spiritual part of it. But if really on the topical part of it, or I wouldn't say topical, but on the expressive part of it, or the experiential part of it, nothing more sensory than wine.
No.
Nothing more sensory than wine. It engages, it challenges, it accepts, it questions all your senses all the time,
Mhm.
all the time. And it's not just when you're drinking wine. It could be something as simple as walking the vineyards, or
Mm.
looking at a barrel, or looking at the must, or tasting wine in the barrel, looking at the fermentations, doing the spice pairings, which is great, great, great journey for us. Nothing engages your senses, including your sixth sense, if you will, like wine does.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there is something that is um, magical about wine and that sharing of the bottle and the stories, the memories it evokes, and the connections it can forge, especially in a world that we are torn apart so much. You know, what the role wine can play, and maybe hopefully bringing um, a greater sense of connectivity.
Yeah, the conversations that are happening nowadays around wine, it's what needs to be emphasized is um, wine is it's a study. It's a it's like a ledger. It's not a page in a book. It's something that you really, when you drink wine, you're always trying to I'm talking about the wine connoisseurs, people who are passionate about wine. They're trying to go into the depth of who did this and why they did this and the intent behind it. And then you go so back, like it's one of those things where how deep you go in the past, and also in the truth of that wine is up
Mm,
to you. And it's so different than having a tequila shot,
right.
and they both sometimes get clubbed into the conversation at the same time. I'm like, no, they're two completely different experiences. Wine is a legacy. Wine
Mm,
has truth in it. Wine has sweat, blood, sweat, tears in it, of generations. No
right.
matter if you're having this vintage, it's generational story that you're telling.
Mm,
And so that's probably the difference. I told you in the beginning of our conversation, I wanted to tell you about this experience that I had. We were in Napa, at a resort for a wedding, and the resort had a chapel in it. And Kanal and our room was right next to the chapel, and it's a tiny, tiny chapel, just like 20 or 30 seats. And uh, one of the days we just went and sat in there. It was beautifully, beautifully decorated. And I looked, and of course, there was Christ on the cross.
hmm
And I've seen that image so many times. I went to a Catholic school. I've walked through vineyards so many times. But you're always seeking. I'm telling you, as a winemaker, you're always seeking for deeper meaning. And I was looking at that image, and I looked and I said, wow, that's actually a vine. If you
Mm,
look at how Christ has his hands spread out,
right.
and he's nailed to that cross, that's how a vine is. A vine is always on a trellis and with its arms spread out, with its cordons, and taking in everything that the earth has given, and giving it back.
Mm-hmm.
It was so symbolic, and I was like, I've never connected the two. And it literally, it looks, Christ actually looks like a vine.
Right. Huh.
And we are building a tasting room on the property, and I'm going to bring that symbolism. I'm like 100% sure I'm going to do that. I
Yeah.
don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And that to me was, and that's the beauty of what we do,
Hmm.
is you can seek these deeper meanings in so many things of what we do in wine.
I love that imagery of taking from the earth and giving back, and sort of with, Christ's outstretched arms, he's welcoming and the vines welcome.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
you
And
know, uh,
this, we talk about, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but we talk about him suffering
yeah,
for us. And that's what a vine does. A
yeah,
vine, it stresses itself and suffers, and then the fruit that it gives us just melodies. And so that has resonated with me
hmm,
so beautifully, and I'm like so excited that I'm going to bring it into our taste room.
that's beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Um, and this has been a rich conversation. I've loved it. But as we begin to wrap up, some fun questions I'd love to ask all of my guests.
Sure.
I'd love to ask all of my guests about food. Um, and so, Neeta, what's one food you refuse to eat?
Any I was offered a carpaccio of horse, and
Hmm,
to me that's like my kindred spirit. So any meat, I eat beef, I eat pork, but I guess any meat of um, animals that are very dear to my heart.
that's
I guess
yeah.
that's the one that it's impossible for me to do
Hmm.
that.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
My eyes biryani, the one that I
Yeah.
told you, that it stays. It's like my comfort food. And my mom, she I told you she cannot walk, or
Hmm.
she's not that
Yeah.
mobile. She will sit on the countertop, and she'll like prop herself and sit on the countertop. And then there is the gas, or the burners, and she'll sit on the countertop and cook for me.
Hmm.
And she doesn't have any strength, but she has the shoulder strength to prop herself up on the
Right.
countertop. And not only for me, she does it for the entire family.
Yeah.
It's if you want to find my mom, she's on the countertop next to the burners, and she has a kitchen staff of about, I would say, 4 people. A 4 people kitchen staff, but she will be propped onto the countertop cooking. So her biryani is my go-to always.
Hmm. I love it. And finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as if you knew you had only one last meal left to enjoy, what would it be? And so for Neeta, I'm going to guess you're going to say your mom's biryani, but if you had one last meal, what would be on your table?
Something that I grew,
Hmm.
something that I planted.
Hmm.
I would want it to be something that I planted. We have a small vegetable garden where we grow uh, some fruits and vegetables. It could be something as simple as a peach, could be something as simple as an onion or ginger, but probably something that I grew.
Hmm. I love
Yeah.
that. That's a unique response I haven't heard from, and I love that imagery of having something you grew, um, so that your legacy lives on.
Yes. Because even in your last moment, it needs to be meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And then I meant to ask you this before, but what what wine do you drink with your mom's biryani? Or
Good question. Um, and this is not to plug LXV, I
no,
promise you,
no.
but it's an honest to God answer. We make Blanc Sangiovese, Blanc de Sangiovese, and it's a white Sangiovese. Sangiovese has been my muse, as I told you about my story. The vibrancy on this wine,
Hmm.
the layering, the texture, the depth, the complexity. If you can imagine, it's a white wine, so it has all the exuberance of a white wine, and then but it's Sangiovese, so it has all the depth and complexity of a red wine. We actually do a 4-course dinner with just that one wine, and so
Hmm.
with the biryani, like that's one of my favorite pairings to do. is
Okay.
our Blanc de Sangiovese.
That's beautiful. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Because for listeners, you've heard of Sangiovese. It's a popular Italian red wine, but you are able to make it a white wine by, I'm guessing, taking off the peel of the grape.
Like very, very hardly any skin contact.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Neeta, this has been a joy just to talk, to hear your story, to share your story with my listeners. And if people are interested in experiencing LXV wines, where can they find you, or how,
Best way is, of course, our website. Just search LXV Wine. If you forget the name of the winery, just say Indian Winery Paso Robles Spice, or if you just say wine and spice, LXV will come up. You can call us, you can email us. All the information is on our website. We are very proud to now be carried in some of the restaurants in Arizona, in Sedona. So that's great if you have listeners in Arizona. And what the beautiful part is, we now have created this tasting kit. We call it the Perfumed Garden, and we've captured our LXV experience in a small kit with 4 small vials of wine, 4 spices, and a beautiful sort of a work board. So it's as if we are there with you, walking you through the wines and the spice pairings. And it's called the Perfumed Garden. And so you can buy that as well.
Awesome.
I think it's sold out at this moment, but our next edition will be released in a month or so.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Neeta. Thanks for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this episode, listeners, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.